I thought the part of the book that was, for me, the most important wasn't about Goldman Sachs, actually. It was, I had always known that your background was one of extraordinary accomplishment, but I felt tremendous empathy that having come from a working class background and had the opportunity to work at Goldman Sachs and be on the management committee, which you made me do, if you remember, because I said I didn't want to do it. But with that, the extraordinary accomplishments that you made from such a humble beginning really was inspiring. And so someone said to me when I was talking about my life and moving forward and helping to create this business, said, how did you feel about imposter syndrome? I think it would help our team understand how you manage that both internally as well as externally.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to give you all comfort, but I'm sure some of you really are imposters. No, seriously. I think, look, this happened to me, where I took I remember the first time, we merged Jay Aaron into Goldman. That's how I got into Goldman. And we didn't have...
Which is a great story.
Yeah, we had a different system, and Goldman had these titles. And when they did it, I said to my boss, who was then at Aaron, who was then becoming a partner at Goldman as a result of that acquisition by Goldman, and I said, what's my title? What title do I have? And he said, title? Call yourself Contessa if you want to. And then I was put in a business where I was like, I had no title, and as a grudgy thing, I had no title, a business card with no title. And then there was like VPs on the desk, and I kind of thought that was cool, that I was like learning something, and it defied the title. I remember once when, when I was after I ran a division, then we were making room for the next generation. Other people moved in, and they moved me up to a title of vice chairman, which usually meant that we expect you to leave soon, because that's a kind of without portfolio. And as it turns out, I didn't leave, and I acted like I was running stuff because I'm a vice chairman, whatever that was. And I remember going to one of the other division heads in a division that I hadn't previously. I had run a division, then I made room for someone else to run the division, became a vice chairman. So one of the other divisions in the firm that I didn't run, I told the person to do X, Y, and Z. And he turned around and looked at me and he said, do I have to listen to you? And I said, to be honest, I'm not sure, but it's your risk. And and it was his risk. So I always acted, as in accordance to who I was talking to, and I had my sense of self, and I would say it, do it or don't do it, but I think you should do this. And eventually, I don't think I ever got ratified in any of the jobs I had, other than that vice chairman job, and after that. But I remember also various times acting like I was in charge. Then I never got a memo that said I was in charge. I just was in charge of stuff. The fact is that we're all strivers. We're all smart enough. People toss around these words. They don't. It's everyone. Somebody would always go to me, is that person smart? And I would always say, smart enough, because there's other things that matter. There's EQ, there's grit, and there's perseverance, curiosity to learn things. And I would say the kind of person that gets into these jobs where they're working really hard, deferred gratification, we're all suffering, we're all driven by something, and usually the commonality is wanting to succeed, wanting to overcome, chip on your shoulder, feeling like an imposter. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I found out in this book was, in this respect, you think you're 1 in 100, and it turns out you're 97 in 100. It turns out more people think that way than you think. And then when you're the first person in the room to say it, everybody chimes in and say, I feel that way too. Mm-hmm. The bottom line, and I had to talk to myself, because at various points when you're in leadership and you don't really, have I become like what Bob Rubin was in 1993? I mean, because I looked up at these people that I thought of, how could I be that way? And then you have to make decisions in one of these crises, and they're critical, and you think to yourself, something? No choice, no problem. I'm here, this is my job. I'm here, might as well be me. And you could keep going through that, who else is here? And if there was someone that you could imagine that's better, well, guess what? They're not here, you're here. So, you just push that away. It can't convince you that you're not. In fact, generally, an imposter syndrome, an insecurity or something like that, has gotten you to the dance.
So with that, one of the things you were really good at was nurturing talent, spotting talent. That's always something that all of us here, as each of them push through, or even me in trying to hire people, need to be in a position that, I learn from the people that I work for. You were pretty good at picking people out and pushing them forward.
If you want to know, what I look for, I wasn't particularly worried or nervous about somebody owning the content of their narrow job. If you're very, very senior, very, very late in your career, you might be bringing in people because of who they know and what they, and their relationships already, because some to extent you're buying those relationships. But really, when you're dealing with what you think of as talent and who can be flexible enough to do the job the first job they're in, and 5 jobs later as the world evolves, you're really looking for stem cells in a lot of ways. What can people turn into? And there, to me, obviously smart, but really the answer is smart enough. But if I had to identify characteristics, I think the 2 most important one in my mind is curiosity. Mm-hmm. Who wants to learn? Who wants to know what's going on here? What's going on in my job? What's going on over there? How do you guys make money? What are they doing in Japan? I mean, where are you in all, just curiosity about the world, about this. And, you could see that on people's, who's an interesting person and who's interested. And so those are the people that are gonna learn, and those are the people who at the coalface are gonna innovate, because they're always curious. So I love people who ask a lot of questions. I didn't love them if they asked the same question 11 times, but that people who are just expansive. So I love that. And the other thing was resilience. Like who overcame stuff. Sometimes, and we went through, 15 crises of the century,
Yes.
at Goldman. And it was always like, you couldn't tell. Like, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't tell with people. There would be people in the organization that were like, great athletes, cowboys on the weekends, tough people. And when things got tough, they were, hyperventilating in a corner. And there were other people who couldn't walk up a whole flight of stairs without stopping in the middle and resting, and who, in a crisis, were tremendous.
And so both in the book, you and in my experience with you as working together, you were always very focused. You talk about it quite extensively on risk management, both physical risk, reputational risk,
Well, yeah.
career management risk, personal risk.
No, I'm a
which you talk about.
scaredy cat, which is good in the business. To be.
Yes.
You got a lot less of it than anybody else, though.
Yes, I wouldn't say I managed by being afraid.
No, well, you got a lot less of it because you were good at it. I mean, you ran a tough area, but you really, I'd walk by his office and there'd be lying outside. There'd be some poor soul in him with his sleeves rolled up with a pencil and an eye shade going like in detail. And every time I go by and look at that, I say, "Oh, I'm so happy that he's doing this stuff." And like I just kept on walking to somebody else who wasn't doing that.
And
so I was always happy.
Before, if you were so relaxed, why was I getting phone calls and texts at 1 a.m. about some position in Japan? That
was almost nothing. I would always.
So you mean compared to how other people were?
You do that
hectored.
stuff. It's very funny. You do that stuff, and I would get, it depends how much time I had. If I was watching a TV show and it was boring or something, I would go through levels and levels of the P&L. I was always a big believer that P&L is the best risk management tool. It's the best, to know where it comes from. And I wouldn't do that every day. I wouldn't do that every month. And, you just look in there and you just go, and you just do it if you don't understand it. And so then if I didn't get something, I'd call them up, call somebody up. And that was a good thing in and of itself, because if you call somebody up, they think, wow, this guy is really going deep. And I was going deep. I don't go deep every day. I don't purport it. Guy knows I'm not doing that every day, but he knows that I really do that. And he tells somebody, but so you do that, it's like, it's a lot of leverage sometimes in little things. It's like digging a test well on a field. and you sort of get a sense of what the field must be like from just drilling a hole in one place. So on the one hand, I learned a lot from drilling those tests and going down and going deep. And then you find out about the P&L, but you also find out about the person who's running the P&L, how he describes it, how enthusiastic he is to explain it to you, how clear it is. Does it make it overly complicated or simple? So you learn a lot about the position, but you're also communicating a lot. Some of the times, the question is really, has embedded it in a statement and a commitment to something that people then, that perceive. So I learned that myself, because I remember once on a weekend, I got a call from out of nowhere. I was very young and in the firm, and my wife Laura gets on that, goes, Lloyd, it's Bob Rubin on the phone, who's like, and I go, like who? And he goes, Bob, like a Saturday morning, it's Bob Rubin on the phone.
Oh, say who Bob was then?
Bob Rubin was probably the CEO, the number, the next obvious senior partner, and then he eventually became senior partner, then Treasury Secretary and whatnot.
And what was your role at the time?
Oh, I was like, running the Deutschmark on the foreign exchange department or something like that.
So the
and
equivalent of like a VP or director now.
Yeah, so something. So I guess so it goes, and so I quickly put on my suit and went to the telephone. And then he just asked me, just like a question, as if he were, and it was a sensible question, but it had nothing to do with big policy or strategy or that. And we had a nice conversation and hung up the phone. And I thought, Bob, I know what Bob Rubin does with his Saturday mornings,
right?
Or at least this Saturday morning. And that, that told,
was that call an inspiration then in some ways for what you did later?
Yes, it was. It was a sense that I got the message that he, rolls up his sleeves and he cares about the details of stuff, and he obviously doesn't have enough range to go over the details of everything that's going on in the company. But I guess today he decided to look at this, and he did. And so I got the message. I think that, and I took that away, and I realized a lot of times I used to always walk the floors. If I had a gap in my calendar, I'd always just walk on the floor, and I'd look over people's shoulder, and I could see somebody typing on his thing, Lloyd's on the floor. Because when I went to that, and that's a good thing, because if you do that and you plop down next to somebody, and you start talking to him or her about what's going on, you find out a lot about the person. He finds out something about you. But guess what? Guys in London knew that I did that, because they said, "Oh, Lloyd, plopped down and talked to me for 25 minutes about this emerging market transaction." And those are, there's a lot. I tried to tell a lot of stories through narratives, just
sure.
A lot of things as opposed to saying lessons. But you pick up more lessons and they stay with you when when it's backed by when it derives from some anecdote like the ones that we're having here.
Sure. I think it sends a message about the culture of how hard leadership is working.
But you talk about the culture. Let's say one other thing, which is here in your private company here, and there's some people who just started with you may not know the difference. There's a very big difference between, a public company with a CEO and a structure and a private company, let's call it a partnership. And there's real differences there. And I know because half my tenure was in private Goldman and half it was in a public company. And there was a big difference between my predecessor who were senior partners as opposed to CEOs. Now, what does that mean? In a private company where all the insiders and some private investors own everything, the people you're talking to are not just your subordinates and your employees, they're your co-owners. And with ownership, comes a feeling like my success is tied to the enterprise as a whole. I mean, if you work for Amazon and you're on the consumer business, you probably don't feel entitled to know or even care about what's happening in AWS side of the business or a different place. But in a kind of a place where people are kind of co-owners, you care about the whole. You have an expectation about getting information about the whole enterprise is doing. People expect to have, in a partnership, in a place where there's mutual ownership, people expect to have influence, which is why they expect information, because they want to know. They expect to be part of a process. of influence. And if you're running these places, you can't just give lip service to that kind of stuff. You have to kind of live that way. You socialize things before you do it. You take people's advice. You maybe act a little bit slower than you would in a corporation where lightning bolts come out of the fingertips of CEOs. This is what we're going to do, because that's a much more structured, hierarchical organization. But when people are co-owners, there's a sense of entitlement on the one hand, and that's reinforced by the way leadership behaves towards people. Look, during the financial crisis, or any crisis, and you haven't had a big one, but something, if you're successful enough, you'll be influential. If you're influential, not everything will go right, and you'll draw attention, and every once in a while it won't be good attention. And so you have to brace yourself for these, you have to brace yourself for these things. And so you just get a history and a tradition of how you want to engage people and what you expect, and that you're going to call on people to step up. And also, reputations get made in those times. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I try to impress, and you have a youngish group here, is that you guys are in the same pod with each other, same cohort, going through your careers together. And today you're here, maybe you'll spend your entire career here, or maybe some years you'll go someplace else, but you're all going through the same block of time with each other, whether you feel it or not, but you'll be a cohort. And 10 years from now or 15 years from now, you'll be over there, someone will be there, and you'll remember each other from here. And it's hard to believe, because some of the people you think, the dopey person you're sitting next to, roll the clock forward 15 years, and he or she is the head of this or the head of that. Believe me, no one's more shocked than me finding out who's the head of all sorts of things. But it happens. And sometimes in difficult times, I tried to remind people that, this is where your reputation is made. And if you think you're not in public enough, and what does it mean to have a reputation? You have a reputation with each other, even your colleagues. And because they don't look that they're that important to you today, when you're all 50 years old and you're all running stuff, you're going to have opinions about each other. And those opinions are going to be from how you acted at this tough moment today, who acted well and who acted badly. And that sticks with you. And so, like I said, it's a matter of preservation and looking forward. There's a lot of reasons to act well other than you need to get through a particular moment. Because, again, the reputations that turn out to be more important to you is not the reputation you have with guys who are already 65 years old. They're going to be, they'll be in a home somewhere by the time you're in their jobs. It's also very much the reputation that you have with each other at this stage. That's the one that's going to be the most important to you. Who acts well and who acted badly.
Well, that speaks a little bit to the dynamics, at least on my part of the trading floors, of collaboration versus competition, which existed concurrently.
Yeah,
and that was always an interesting phenomenon in culture at a firm.
Well, that has to be managed. You get people who are getting strivers, who are competitive, who want to do well, and they want to do well, and you mark yourself to market sometimes against your colleague. And generally, what guys like us have to do, who are higher up, have to say, guys, if you throw in to the platform, and every once in a while you exceed, let somebody go, it's like the metaphor of the 800-pound gorilla in the forest. I guess they're in jungles, not forests, but the 800-pound gorilla. What happens if you have a firm with 20 800-pound gorillas? That means from time to time, every 800-pound gorilla have to say, "Oh, excuse me, after you," because there's more than one. And that's what we always have. So you have to manage that in people. And so we had a lot of 800-pound gorillas. We had a lot of people who had the ego to think that they were the smartest person in the world at what they did. And a lot of them were right. They were the smartest part, but so what? You still have to exceed, you still have to throw in, and you have to make the platform better. And what I always try to convince people, if you just subordinate your ego from time to time, you look at the place as a whole, you kick back, you don't get grudgy and crazy just because you lose an argument once in a while, and you let it. If you build the platform, it'll not only be good for your job and your commercial life, it'll be good for your personal life, because that platform then becomes something that you could then exploit.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Great work.
Good.